Okay, so now that I've got a very basic setup for my project, I know the design's nothing special, but it's enough to show you what we need to. I've got a perspective view there, and I'm going to use that to then start to look at some lighting. So I thought before I go into lighting families, I can show you a couple of little tips there for working with perspective views like this. Because you can see there that the view doesn't show everything in the background. So of course this interior has walls all the way around, just so that it's clear. If I go to the ground floor plan, so I'm looking through this area, but I can't see the back wall. So I know that the view is called 3D View 6, and if I go down the project browser and then right click and go to show camera, then I can see the camera. That's a really helpful thing on its own. So being able to show you camera, if you don't know about that, really important. Helps you to adjust them, of course, in Revit in different views. And so one option will be to drag the end of that view, that cone there. I can extend it all the way to include the walls. And then if I go back to my view, then I can see the walls that were missing. But that's only one option. So if we go back to the floor plan, so again, I'll just show that camera. And then we can bring this back to the way it was, just so I can show you a slightly different way. Okay, so now I can go into properties. So again, I'm missing that back wall. The reason it's missing is because of the clipping. So in the view properties, I can just turn far clip active off. Right, and so that's another way of showing everything that you want in camera views. So now I'm just going to go a bit further with the camera view. So I'm zooming out so to extend that field of view. And then I'm going to use the navigation wheel. So I might just bring out the sides a little bit more actually, so you can see it a bit wider, but I still can't see what's above. So to adjust the view, I'm going to use the navigation wheel. And you can see this on the full navigation wheel. If you haven't got that, just make sure you click on the little down arrow under it and choose full navigation wheel. So then I'm going to use the look option, and then I can adjust the view or essentially rotate the camera so that I can see my ceiling. Now, if you're using the file that I gave you, you might have multiple ceilings there already, so just be careful of that. I think I accidentally left an extra ceiling or two in there. So you can see there, if I click on this ceiling, now make sure if you can't select it, just check to see if you've got that select by face option turned on. So that way I can click on the face of the ceiling to select it. Then I'm going to hit delete. And so that you understand how to make ceilings, I'm also going to delete the next ceiling. There's my other ceiling. So I'll delete that. So I've still got a ceiling out the back there, which I'll keep, but there's also, there's a double ceiling there. So I'm going to delete one of them. They're just overlapping, and then there now I've just got the one, oh no, so there's three. So, okay, so I'll delete that as well. And there finally, there's my ceiling. And I can tell because it's gone blue, that means that generally it's the last one. Okay, so I've got my ceiling, so it's just a question there, so let's check that. Yeah, you found three, yeah, I know, sorry about that. I shouldn't have left them all there, but hopefully, well, that's a good thing for you to work out. Okay, so now I need to go back to my plan, but I'm not going to a floor plan, I'm going to my ceiling plan. So very quickly, I just want to go over the view settings. So in the ceiling plan view, I've of course got properties there showing the ceiling plan properties. Scrolling down, I'm just going to go to view range, click edit, and then check the settings. Now these settings are right, but you often will need to adjust these. So I just thought I'd go over them. You might have it on level above, but it can also be on, let's say it's on associated level, and it's on, well, I'll just make it 2300. Oh yeah, and view depth also has to be the same. and then the cut plane. So the cut plane's going to come down, just so it lets me click OK. View depth is set below the top clip plane. No, it's not. Oh yeah, so that's gone to level above again, so it just does that. Yep, that's it. Okay, so now I can no longer see my ceiling. It's there, or the one here is there, but I can't see that, and I definitely can't see what's above it. So again, coming back to view range. So often you do want the top setting to be on level above. So let's make that 0. And then the view depth in a ceiling plan has to be at least as high as the top. So again, if I set it to level 1 or the level above, I can make the offset 0, that's fine. The cut plane I'm actually going to leave at 1800. So that means it'll cut through my doors as well. So now notice I've got the openings there coming up, the head, and then there's my ceiling that's at the back that I can select. And now I don't have a ceiling here. What I'm seeing there is the floor above the ceiling. But that's exactly what I want, so that's good. So now I'm going to make a new ceiling. So on the Architecture tab, I'll go to Ceiling. And you can see that it's actually going to work with the automatic ceiling option. Because of the way I've modeled this space, it's finding the walls. And so when it highlights them in red like that, it means it will let you make an automatic ceiling. But I don't want to do that. I want to show you also how to make your own shape for the ceiling. So here it's on automatic ceiling. I'm going to change that to sketch ceiling. And then I'll use pick walls to start with and go around picking each of these walls. And then pick the other walls as well. Right, so they're on the wrong side. So I'll simply flip that line to get onto the right side, and then go back to using trim to join all those lines together. Right, now for the height of the ceiling, I've got a few options. I can either set it to the level above, to level 1, and work down from there, or I can leave it on ground floor and work up from ground floor. So I'm just going to quickly change to a section view so that I can see what my levels are. I don't remember the heights. So here, level 1 is 3500. So I'm going to use the, I'll now show you, so here, I just want to show you this. So I wanted to use the measure tool to measure the height of the ceiling there at the back, but I can't because the ceiling that I'm working on is in the ground floor plane. So it's annoying. Revit won't let you measure in a different plane to the one you're working in. So to measure that, I'd need to finish it and then come back and measure. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to my ground floor plan, ground floor ceiling plan, sorry, and then simply take a stab or have a guess at my the height that I want, and I can adjust this easily afterwards. I'll make it, let's say, 3000. And that should, now in the section view, I'm just going to change to that so you can see what happens when I finish it. So if I click tick to finish, and you can see then, yeah, pretty good guess. So that's coming at the right height, but I can always adjust that now. It's quite easy to just change the height. So I can make it 3200. You'll see it move up, or let's try 2800. Of course, it'll move down. Okay, so, and also, okay, so remember, with ceilings, you of course have the same issues as you have with floors. You need to work out the voids. So here, if it needs to, of course, go around this stair, I would need to edit that. So no problem, back into the plan, and good chance to quickly look at the way spiral stairs work. So I don't need to be in my ceiling plan to continue editing this. I can go to the ground floor plan or to the level 1 floor plan. And that way I can easily see where the step would be, where I come off that spiral stair, and then think about the other aspects. So maybe now going back to the ground floor plan, and I can see where the first step is. I can't really make my other edge there because I need to step off the stairs, so I'll just put it just by guesswork on another step, and then going to pick lines, I can pick the outside of my spiral stairs. Instead of using trim to corner to join those lines together. And this is where it can be a bit frustrating, because the way trim works is that it tries to join to the closest edge, which in this case is at the end that I don't want to change. So there's a simple solution there. When you have an arc like that, you just drag it around so that end is closer to the thing you're trying to join it to. So now that works. So then here, well, it's a nice thing, a nice detail is there to have a curve on the inside. So you've got a little curve in the floor, and if you put that in, that's a nice thing that tells people they have a spiral stair. And again, we've got the same issue there, it's trying to join to the other end. Here it should be, yeah, there we go, it's just where I was choosing it. There we are, so that's it. So I've now got a hole in the ceiling that should match the hole in the floor. Okay, so back to my 3D view. Right, so then if we look around, we can see there's my stair with the hole in the ceiling. I probably need to fix up the hole in my floor, but I won't do that now, I'll do that later. Okay, so coming back to this view though, then of course we can see the ceiling there as well. Here's my ceiling, so it's really important when you go to make lights that you have a ceiling that's working properly, because if you don't, then ceiling hosted lights, of course, are very difficult. And here I'm just clearing out, I know there are some extra ceilings there that I'm going to delete, and now you can see I've just got that one ceiling that I've made. So again, just watch out for those extra ceilings, you'll probably need to clear a few. And so now I'm finally ready to place some lights. So going to place component, load family, and then we'll go to, well, I'll go to my library. No, sorry, I won't, because you might not have all these lights. So I'll go to the default library and use the lighting folder, architectural, internal, and then get the downlight recess can to start with. It's not the best light to begin with, but you can make it work really well once you set it up properly. There are others you should be aware of, so downlight spots also very useful, and then you've got all the pendant lights as well, which again can be useful, but you often need to adjust those quite a lot as well. And then finally you've got the new LED type lights. So this downlight round LED is yet another downlight, and then the rectangular one actually is a really good one as well. But also with those, I found you do need to adjust them quite a lot to get them to work well. But yeah, you should have a good look through that lighting folder if you haven't already, and just get familiar with the different lights you've got. But again, starting with downlight recessed can. And then I'm just going to place a couple roughly where my table and chairs are. Okay, so I can see one of those lights. If I was to just expand the view a bit, I can, I'm sure, pick up another one. Right, so there's another one. The other one's probably just behind the camera or just outside the view. Okay, so then with the light selected, yeah, is that a question from here or another group? Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so with the light selected, I can then go to edit type, and you'll see that you've got a couple of parameters there. So the first one is for the lamp shade, of course, just like it says, and then the other one is for the diffuser. The diffuser is the glass below the light bulb, essentially. So you want to check that just to make sure that it is on a material like this. That's a glowing material, so it's glass white luminance. If I go to appearance, then you'll see it's got this self-illumination option, and it will glow. It's quite bright. 2500 is quite a high level, but for this, that's pretty good. You might need to dial it back to about 1000 in some cases if it's flaring out too much, but again, that's probably okay to start with. We'll have a look at that once I render. I might need to adjust it. Okay, so, but again, you still want to have a look at materials, and, oh sorry, so back to edit type again. So as well as the materials, if we scroll down, then you've got the settings for the brightness and things like the temperature. and also in this case, because it's a spotlight, the type of spotlight, it has a field and a beam angle. So they're all the parameters that affect the way the light works. For this, the tilt angle isn't really relevant. We want that to always be on 90, but I might show you some others in a minute where the tilt angle is relevant. But yeah, but those are the main parameters. So again, the field and the beam angle, which I'll show you when we look at the family itself. But then also the temperature is an important one. So maybe I'll start with that because that's the one you can see straight away if you click on temperature. You may have come across this. Have you done any lighting in other subjects where you've come across temperature values in Kelvin? Anyone? No? No? Okay, good. Okay, well, I'll explain it. Okay, yep. So if you haven't come across Kelvin, so Kelvin is the way temperatures are measured from absolute zero. So it's used in physics and anything scientific. So absolute zero is the minimum temperature that anything can go to. So if it's 0 degrees, the electrons are not spinning around the nucleus, right? So they're basically stationary. Nothing gets to 0 degrees because it's impossible to have electrons that don't move, but you can get very close to zero. So it's a physics based approach to measuring temperature, which is really important when you start dealing with light. So because it's measuring from a much lower point than what we do with Celsius or Fahrenheit, you end up with much higher values usually as well for the things that we're working with. So 2800 is actually quite a low value in Kelvin. So when you see K there, that means Kelvin. So you can see there we've got some presets, and they're a really good way of getting a handle on what sort of values you deal with in Kelvin. And you might think, well, why do we need to even worry about temperature? The reason you do is because the temperature controls the color of the light. So again, low temperature values like this, 2800, give you warm colors. So orange, and when you get very low, it actually goes to red. But with the values you'd be dealing with, it would mostly be orange. Let's see if we make it a bit lower. I'll make it 1000. Here we go, 1800 is minimum. Okay, so I'll do that. So 1800, again, that's almost red, but you can see still, obviously, is orange. So that is the lowest you can go to. So then neutral is between 5,000 and 6,500 roughly. Now you can see with 5,000 it's still a little bit orange, but that still is considered neutral in lighting. And then up to 6,500 and it's almost blue-ish, if you can see that colour there. It's getting a bit of a blue tinge. But that is, I mean, to my eyes, that's neutral almost. But again, technically that is actually a cool colour when you get to 6,500. So above that, we're getting into the cooler range. So it seems strange, but the higher the temperature, the cooler the colour. So once we go above 6,500, now when it says cool in the name, like this fluorescent cool white, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's that cool. It's cool for a fluorescent light, but a cool white fluorescent is still quite warm. So again, we've got to find something that's above 6,500. I know the xenon is. So xenon, oh no, 6,000. Okay, so 6,500, that's, yeah, I mean, in lighting, 6,000 to 5,000 is neutral. 6,500 should be beyond that, but let's go to one of these others. No, that's a warm one. There is one that's higher, I thought, but maybe xenon is all they've got now. Yeah, okay, so what I'll do is I'll go to custom and I'll just make that really high so you can see what the cool extreme looks like. Yeah, so now you can see hopefully that we can see the blue. It's almost like cyan, but it's definitely in the blue spectrum. That is, again, with a very high temperature. And so that might make it clear why you would have seen, I'm sure you've all seen different coloured lights. I don't mean colours that are put onto the bulb, but colours from the light source itself. And it's again all to do with the temperature. So you've got that range from warm to cool. But again, the presets are a really good way of getting a handle on it. So incandescent, of course, is very warm. Fluorescents do tend to be cool, but then compared to newer LED fluorescence and also the newer energy efficient lights. A lot of these older ones. Oh, there's the fluorescent daylight. That's the one I was looking for. So that's 6500. So they're all a bit warm, the older ones. But then some of the newer settings they have for the newer lights that are a bit warmer. Right. So for a while I was doing lots of cool lighting for everything, but now I'm moving back to being a bit more balanced, and I do use warm lights a bit more. But it's a preference for your design, and also think about how that ties in with your materials. And it's a really important thing that has a big effect on the way your renders turn out. So again, that's just the temperature. Then above that, you've got the intensity. So initial intensity, basically just think of that as intensity. That's the brightness of the light. So clicking on this option here, it'll come up quite often with a wattage. That is the least useful setting for the brightness of your light, because you need to use two values. You need the wattage, the electrical consumption, but also then the efficiency. And I wouldn't even know how to look that up. It's not worth it. You don't need to know that. All you need to do is change to a better option like either luminous flux or luminous intensity, because you can see they just use one value, and that's all you need. So the difference between those is luminous flux is metric, luminous intensity is imperial. So candelas, CD is candelas. They're basically the equivalent of a candle. So this light, in theory, is the equivalent of 2,858 candles. Lumens, which is what you have with luminous flux, lumens are basically metric candles, except they're about, I think they're about 3 candles, something like that roughly. But the important thing there is, again, it's a single value. And in metric countries, we do use lumens over candelas. So a good value I often start with is around 1,000, and then I go from there and adjust it up or down a little bit. But a 1,000 lumen light should be visible easily in most spaces. If you have a lot of downlights, you might need to reduce that because it might be too bright. But otherwise, again, it's a good starting point. So that's going to change all of those lights because they're the same type. So maybe before I go and look at the family, I'll just do a render. So to test out your lights, highly recommended that you do it first just with a local render using the teapot, and also that you use interior artificial only for the preset. So if you missed it, I've just clicked quickly on the teapot on the view control bar there. You can also go to the view tab, of course, and click on render from there. And it's important to know that because I've noticed sometimes that teapot disappears from the view control tab, just temporarily. It does go away sometimes, but you can always get to it on the view tab and then click render there. Okay, so now I'll click render just with draft. It's fine. And it shouldn't take too long. Okay, so you can see quite blue. Now, the blue of the table and the chair material is contributing to that. But even on the walls, which are grey or white, it looks very blue, and that's because of that temperature that I set, which was very high. Okay, so that's what I mean by testing the render. So I'm not even going to wait for that to finish. It'll only be a few more seconds, but I'll still stop it and then go back and adjust the lighting. So again, I was just showing you that as an example, and we'll come back and reduce that temperature. That's very, very high. So I'll go back maybe to D50, which is 5,000 Kelvin. And so notice I'm really in the habit of saving as I'm doing this, because there's nothing worse than doing all this hard work. Setting up render settings is a lot of work, and constantly testing them, and this is where your computers will get overloaded, and often the software will crash and you'll lose everything if you don't save it. So it's really good to just get into the habit of saving as you go, every step at this point. no autosave in Revit, unfortunately. Okay, so that's a little bit less blue, but still maybe too much, but I'll live with it. It's mostly now because of the material. So then the next thing I want to show you quickly before we get into the light family itself is the exposure. So I just have to give this a minute to finish now. It's been a minute longer, not even a minute, another few seconds hopefully. It's nearly done, even though it's only on 13% it says, but I know it's actually only got a little bit to go. But another tip I can give you while this is happening is you can see here I'm testing this with a very simple scene. And so you can start to do your lighting well before your design's finished and try out your lighting settings and get a lot of the setup with just a few lights. It renders much, much faster when you only have a few lights and only have minimal geometry. You can test all of this and get a basic setup, and then as you add more detail and put in more lights, you can be sure that it's going to work. So now that's done though, I can click Adjust Exposure, and then I'll firstly make it brighter. That's very dark, but it's not because I don't have enough light, it's because the exposure value is too high. So I'm going to reduce that. The range should be between 2 and 15. So for a scene with only 1 or 2 lights, it would be down to 2. But if I have that on 2 now, you can see that's far too bright because I have got a few lights in there. So I'll bring this up and really just by eye get it to the right setting, but it's very sensitive, so just make sure you adjust that in increments. Okay, so that's looking a lot better, of course. And then now I can also look at the white point value. So this is really a compensation for the temperature that I just set in the light. So this is global though, so you can have a scene with lots of different light with different temperature values that you can adjust separately, but then this white point value adjusts the temperature globally. So here you can see it's on 6,500, which again is in that just above that neutral range, but that's actually quite standard for the global setting. So if we take it down, it'll become cooler still, because remember it's a compensation, so it works the opposite to the way you might think. So lower is cooler, right? That's obviously far too cool. So maybe I want to compensate for my cool lights and make it warmer. Right, so now you can see that's a bit more balanced. That's actually getting towards neutral because I've taken it higher than it was to start with. If I go really warm, you can see it's going to go very orange. But that's still almost acceptable because I've got a cool light. If this was a scene with lots of warm lights, that would look really orange. I'll show you what it looks like. So if I bring that light up, you can see that's looking far too bad, far too orange, but I can't really make it too overblown because my lights were pretty good to start with. They were already fairly cool, so if I compensate by making it very warm, it's still going to be in that neutral range, but you might see if you've got a very warm scene to begin with, dragging this light up, it's going to look, very orange. Okay, so anyhow, that's hopefully going to give you a good idea about exposure settings as well. And those are the two most important, the exposure value at the top and the white point at the bottom. Saturation also is a good one to look at. So that's essentially the amount of colour. So to the left, as it says, grey, so it takes out all the colour. To the right, intense, amplifies all the colours. And it can be interesting sometimes, but normally you don't want that. So somewhere in between, and again, it's just the amount of colour you want in your render. And it's a good way of compensating for things that are overly colourful, which can happen. Or for maybe beefing up some colours. If you want a nice bright scene where the colours are really going to stand out, then you can sometimes increase it. It's up to you. So these are all just artistic preferences. So I'm just going to make sure. Yep, sorry, just seeing if there are any other questions. Okay, so again, exposure, of course, is tied in with lighting, and really what we're dealing with here, with lighting and rendering and exposure as well, we're really dealing with photographic principles. So that's a really important thing to understand, and all of that again ties into perspective. Remember, in cameras and perspective the same thing. So coming back now to the light that I started with, I'll select that now and go to Edit Family and just show a little bit more about how the light emission works. So the emitter, the thing that emits the light, is up the top there. And I might go to an elevation view so you can see that icon from the side. So just zoom in there. So there's my light source. It's inside the light fixture. It's this yellow thing. So you can select that. And I might just quickly flick over to a template. I will make a new lighting family just so that you can see the other ways that that lighting symbol comes up. You don't need to make a lighting family at this point, but again, it'll help you to see how they look. So I'm just going to use metric lighting fixture to make a new light family. So you can see there now it's a yellow circle, which if I look at in a 3D view, you'll see is actually a sphere. So that's possible as well. You can have different shapes for the light emitter or the light source definition is what it's called in Revit. So I just keep getting messages. Is that someone here? No, good. Okay. So then I'm actually just going to close that file. Again, don't want to do anything there. I just want to show you a different sort of light shape. So if I again selected in the downlight family that I've been working with, then you can see yep, sorry about this, I'll just keep getting messages. So, okay, so again, if I go to light source definition, then you can see firstly, in the top row, we've got the emit from shape options. Now, I'm just going to tell you something I've worked out with Revit, which is basically that these don't really make much of a difference. One day, maybe they will. Right, so if I change to line, you can see it's still emitting from a point. Rectangle, same thing. Circle, same thing. Now, I know why they've left this option in here. It's because if you take this same light into 3ds Max, where you do have a lot more options for lighting, then these do make a difference. So if you bring this light in with the line setting, it will come in and then it'll work as a line. In some ways, it works partly as a line in Revit, but again, don't expect it to work like a fluorescent light or a proper circular light source. It just doesn't, unfortunately. So effectively, point is the only option you need to use. I'll show you some options if you do want a linear light. There are some ways of making that, but you don't use this option generally, unfortunately. But it's still good to think about the options that you have to emit from shape, and later, you know, Revit may change and this might work better, but also it'll give you some ideas about the way light sources work. And also if we get time to look at 3ds Max or even Lumion, there are options to have the light emit from different shapes and have it actually come up in the render. But yeah, I've seen a lot of people have issues with this when they set it to line, say if they want recessed lighting behind a bar or you know, a piece of furniture, and then not able to get the light to come out from a line. It comes out again still from a point like this. And it's a bit disappointing, but that's just the way that the rendering engine that comes with Revit works at the moment. So what does work though really well is the light distribution. So again, I'm going to leave it on emit from point. And then the first one there, spherical, of course, emits in a sphere. So it comes from, so again, that's not anyone from here, is it? No. Okay. So, oh yeah, sorry. I keep getting messages and it's, yeah, cool. Yeah, God, sorry. Okay, it's all about Teams. Okay, so, oh yeah, no, we do have a question. How to place light onto a particular surface? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, well, that's, yeah, well, that's kind of what we're doing now. So we put this light is ceiling hosted. So that's really important. So most lights are ceiling hosted, or many lights are ceiling hosted, and that means that you need a ceiling to place the light. And so any light that is ceiling hosted, and that is essentially most of the lights in the default library, they will automatically go onto the surface of the ceiling. Now, there are wall-hosted lights as well, which I'll maybe quickly show you, but I'm going to show you a better option for making lights that are not ceiling-hosted, and that is to make them unhosted, and then you can have them just floating anywhere and place them wherever you like. So I'll show you that afterwards. So definitely, yeah. So yeah, definitely, Christy, I'll show you that because it's that's a really important thing. if you're thinking about putting lights onto things other than ceilings. So creating the light source using materials, then painting that material. Yes, because yeah, that's right. So you can use that option. So that's, yeah, wall sconce and shelving. Yes, I'll show you that in a minute. Yep. So yeah, but yeah, that point about putting light materials, it's a different process to what I'm showing you now. It's not a light family. You're doing it with the material. They do work as a light source, but they don't work quite as well as actual light families. So the way you work with those material-based lights, or it's called object-based lighting, is that you use them as supplementary lights. You still need to have some lighting families to provide most of your light, and then you do extra glowing materials and other secondary light sources with a material. They do act as a light source, so they will light up other things, but not as well as a light family. So I'll try and give you some examples on that if I get time at the end. But yeah, good to think about that too. But yeah, so just coming back to the distribution. So this is a really important thing to understand how light works. So again, spherical, uniform in all directions. Hemispherical, the same, but only a hemisphere. And you can kind of see from the distribution there. So it comes from the point. So it would only be down and left and right, forward and backwards, but not up. They can be useful, both those distributions, but probably the one that you use the most is spot. Okay, so spot emits in a cone from the point, and you've got then two values that you need to set the size of that cone. You've got the inner value and the outer value. So the inner value is where the light is the brightest, the outer value is where the light reaches 0. So it's already on cone, and I'll come back to that, and that's what I'm going to look at mostly. But I just want to point out the last one. If you're interested in the way light really works, then this is the one you need to look at. How do you show natural light? Yeah, that's the sun. Yeah, so I'll try and show you the sun at the end as well. Yep. Okay, so yeah. So again, looking at the web-based lights, they're the most complicated, but also they're the most true to life. So you might think, if you've thought about lighting, you might think that light is distributed from a light source using one of these other options with a real light source. If you imagine the way, a torch or a candle or a light bulb emits light, the three options there you would think would give you most of the different ways that light really does work in the real world. But in fact, it doesn't. In real life, it's like this. And I won't say any more about it than that. Look up IES files. IES is the International Illumination Engineering Society. Illumination Engineering Society. So these guys are basically electrical engineers who've then decided to specialise in lighting, and most of them are geniuses when it comes to the physics of light. And I think it's a fascinating thing. If you're interested, it will teach you a lot about lighting, and maybe you'll understand why it's not often taught anymore in design courses like this, because there's a huge amount of physics involved to really understand it. But if you read up on it, you might be really surprised about the way light does really work, and you might realise that physics is not just all about straight lines and things that you think you see. In real life, light does not go in straight lines. It does all sorts of crazy, complicated things, and it's fascinating, I think. But again, I won't say too much more about it than that. Look up IES if you want to know about it. And to use the photometric web option, you need to get hold of an IES file, and they're freely available. So you can use these IES files in Revit and other programs, and then you can use this photometric web option, and you essentially choose the file that these genius engineers have set up, and it gives you real-world lighting distributions, which but again, the physics is too hard for me to explain, so I'll let you research that if you're interested. Otherwise, though, the spot option is the one you use mostly, so mostly we'll look at that. So coming back to the light source, I've just left it on spot, and we'll go to edit the, so I'm just going to go to edit the family types. So if you're wondering why I'm doing this, it's because I want to show you how these values look when they're different. So in a project, you would of course go to edit type once you've selected the family, but in a family, you go to family types up here to do the same thing. So here are my values for the spot and the beam angle. So the field angle is, sorry, not the spot, the field and the beam angle. So the field angle is the outer cone. I'll make that 35. So I can't use my delete key because it'll stop the video. So, okay, so you can see that it's brought the inner cone, the outer cone in close to the inner cone. Of course, if I change the other value, the beam angle, that would of course reduce the size of the inner cone. So to make that a bit clearer, I'm going to close this file and then change those values in the project so you can see how they render differently. So going back to the, again back to the light, edit type, and then scrolling down, you can see again we've got those same values. So spot and, sorry, field and beam, spot field angle and spot beam angle. So I'll make the field angle there, again, 35. You can't see the cones in this view, that's why I just showed them in the family. So now I'll render to show you the effect of that light. And if you're wondering why I didn't do this in the family, you can't render in family files. So I had to show you in the project. Okay, so you can see now how I've got a really hard edge to those, to the light that's coming out from those lights, because again, the field and the beam angle are close together. Yes, Jacob, you will. Yes, so Jacob's just asking about, yeah, so if you change your genetic model to ceiling, then Revit absolutely will recognize it as a ceiling, and you can put lights on it. Yeah, I do that all the time. Yep, so to make a raked ceiling or a curved, vaulted ceiling, anything like that, you need to model it like you probably have. And yeah, it works perfectly. That's how you do it. Yep, that's the secret. Yep, yep. Yeah, and you can host lights at any angle. It's brilliant. Yep, yep. So that's spot on. Yep. Okay, so I'll stop the render there, but hopefully that's fairly clear. You can see then how the field and the beam angle work. And that way you can control the edge of your lights, and it's a brilliant way of controlling things like spotlights. So if I now go the other way, okay, so let's go and bring the beam angle, oh sorry, not beam angle, the field angle up to something fairly high. So I'll make it maybe 105, and I'll bring my beam angle back down, let's say to about 15. So they're a long way apart now. And again, if I render, instead of getting a really hard edge light, which might work for a spotlight where we want to be focusing on something, this time we're going to get nice diffuse edges or soft edges to the light, and we won't really see where each light source is pointing, but that's often what you want. In most spaces, you cannot see the edge of the light all that clearly. I know this one, having said that, it's because the bright spot is there. That's what we're seeing. We're not seeing the edge of the light. We're just seeing the bright spot. Okay, so a bit of trial and error. You also got to watch out with Revit. It's not the most physically correct lighting engine. So with 3ds Max, you get a bit more obvious control. Here, I know why. It's because I've made the beam angle very small, and that's why we're seeing that very focused point of light in the middle. If I spread it out, you might think you get a bigger bright spot, but in fact, you get a more spread out bright spot. And this is just one of the peculiarities of Revit. Most other lighting engines work a bit differently. Okay, so there we are. So now you can see more spread out, but again, we can start to see the edge now because those values are coming close together. That bit of trial and error, and you'd be able to reduce that as well. And remember, I'm still on draft, so if I increase the quality of the render, it would soften those edges a little bit as well. But what I might try and do is just bring that out to the maximum, which is about 180. Now again, because of the way the Yeah, now it doesn't want me to do that. So I can go a bit lower, maybe 170 or something. Should let me do that. Nope. Okay, there is a limit, so let's try 140. Yep, we can do that. But I found there's a point where it doesn't really make a difference anymore. Again, other programs, if you try lighting in 3ds Max, especially with V-Ray, you'll see you can control this a bit more precisely. With Revit though, fortunately, there's a bit of trial and error just to get it right. So yeah, you can see it's not really making a difference there. Again, I know it might seem strange if I was to go and then play with this a bit more. I know the beam angle probably will have an effect there if I bring that down. Yeah, a lot of trial and error, but it definitely is nice to look at that sort of fine control you get with your field and your beam angle. Okay, but that's just for downlights. And then, but remember, you can apply this to any light. You can turn any light into a spotlight, whether it's ceiling hosted or not. So I might very quickly show you some other hosted lights. We've only got a few minutes left, but I'll try and show you that. So there we are. See now that's much softer, or a bit softer, because I changed the beam angle. So I'll very quickly show you the other hosted lights. So, and then we should be able to have a bit of time to quickly look at unhosted lights and natural lights as well in the few minutes left. So very quickly, the wall lights. In here, I don't have many because I'm in the default library, but I want to stick with that because you probably won't have the full, you may not have the full library. So we've got these wall lamps, which are essentially wall hosted. And then you also have sconces. So sconces are all wall lights. Okay, and you can place them in perspective. Now you can see this one, it's gone onto the wall, but it maybe is on the wrong side of the wall. So I'm going to go back to the plan view and see if I can find it there. I can't see it there, so I'll check my ceiling plan. And I can't see it there either. Now, I know if I change the view settings, I would be able to get it to come up, but instead I'll just make a section and then open that view, and then just check in wireframe to see. Oh, where'd it go? Maybe it went onto another wall. Okay, I'll just try and place it again. So you definitely can place them in perspective, but sometimes a bit unpredictable because they don't go where you think they will. So placing it in plan there, you can see it's much clearer as I'm placing this sconce where it's going to go. I can see it in plan, but then I'll go back to my perspective view to see it in with the height. And we can, of course, adjust the height using the dimension there. And you can, of course, in that section that I just made, that's not it. That one, of course, you can adjust the height maybe a bit more easily. And so this sort of light, even though it's wall hosted, has the same options. So we go to edit type, you can see all the same settings. Right, so you've got the brightness there, temperature. This one is not a spotlight, so it doesn't have the beam and the field or the tilt angle. So that means it has a uniform distribution. In other words, it's using either spherical or hemispherical. I say it's hemispherical, definitely. So when we select it, you can see light source definition, it's on hemisphere, which is what it should be. Okay, so again, just testing the render. I know if everyone can stay for a few minutes over time, hopefully that's okay. It'll just hopefully be another couple of minutes. Great. Okay, now you can see it looks bright, and it is giving a bit of light to the scene, but it also looks very bright because of the material. So it's getting some light from the light source itself, but then the material also acts as a light source and it's lighting up the scene a little bit and it's making it glow very brightly. So to make it glow less brightly, I probably wouldn't look at changing the light source. I actually don't mind having warm and cool lights mixed together. They can be really interesting. But I'd change the material. So if we go to edit type, we'll see the material there is on glass frosted, which I know by default is very bright. So, well, it's on 1300, which actually isn't super bright, but I'm going to take it down because it's a large object. It is looking bright, so I'm going to take it down to 500. And then we might be able to read that it's a cylinder and not just a big blob on the wall. Okay, still looks very bright, but if I render this on medium, I know I probably get a bit of definition there, but you could take that down even further, definitely. So, I mean, I think even 100 maybe. So a lot of trial and error with this, especially self-illuminated materials. It's actually a lot of experimentation really to get the brightness right for those. Oh, now it didn't go to, what? I know I put it down here, so it didn't go down, that's why it didn't look different, but I'm just going to take it right down anyway. Let's try 100. Okay, so it still looks very bright, but this is on draft. We should be getting a bit of definition there. Might just have to leave it to finish rendering. It's starting to get a bit of definition, but it maybe even needs to come down further. So you can go easily as low as 10, and you'll still see some effect from the glowing. But notice how over here we're starting to get some unusual artifacts. It's all to do with the way the photons emit from the light source. And again, it's because the material is acting as a light source as well. So we've got to think about that when we adjust these things. But that's just how it is with lighting. The physics gets very involved. And that's why I always recommend knowing about Photoshop to do your lighting as an extra option. And you can also then use it to clean up any issues with your lighting, which is very common. I don't know why this is not saving, so I'm changing it, of course. I'm just going to change it to a different material. I've got some issue here with that. That's odd. I've never seen that before, but I'm just going to see if I can fix it this way. Maybe it's got to be on custom to change it. Yeah, that's a new thing, but it didn't used to be like that. Okay, so I'll try to put it to 100 again because yeah, that's odd. I'm going to make sure that's staying because there's something. Yeah, okay, now it's going to another preset, but anyhow, that's okay. So finally, we might be able to get some difference there when I render. There we are. Okay, so you can start to see that yellow colour is now coming from the temperature of the material. Right, so it's far too warm. So again, this is where it helps to know about temperature. Oh, now that's 6500, so maybe the material, oh, now the colour here, so you can see the colour also has an effect, so I'm going to make that white. And then the temperature, 6500 should be good. So it's got some issues here, I can't change those things. I think, here we go, now it's working. That's better. Okay, so I'm going to go for daylight cool. Yeah, that's lower even. So that should be fine. That's a cool one. So it must have been the colour up there. But again, lots of things you've got to look at. Anyhow, so maybe I'll leave that one there. I don't think I'll even worry about rendering it because I want to show you as well the floating lights. So often you can't use ceiling, also hosted lights, wall hosted or ceiling hosted, because you just want to have a light somewhere else. So back to place a component, load family, and sort of make sure you know about the studio light. I think a lot of you do, but just make sure if you don't that you're familiar with studio lights. They're in every lighting folder. You'll always find studio light there. And that basically is a big floating ball of light. So I'm just going to put that here, maybe further down the corridor. And you can see it's telling me it's not visible in this view, but I can go to my ground floor ceiling plan and hopefully see it there. Also, if I get my section into a good place, I can also, of course, see the light there. So there's my studio light. So it comes in fairly high by default. You can, of course, just lower that by dragging it. And again, at first, it's just a big floating ball of light. When you go to edit type, you'll see, you can see from the distribution, I won't bother showing you the family, but the distribution is spherical. So it's not a spotlight. It goes evenly in all directions, sometimes called an omnidirectional light. And so this one, the intensity is very, very high by default. So that's why you may not have studio lights and found that you didn't like them. It's probably because the intensity was too high. So if you go to initial intensity, it's on wattage, which I don't like. So again, I'm going to change the luminous flux, and you can see 7,000 lumens. So once you're familiar with lumens, you know that that is very, very high. So again, I'll start with around 1,000 as a baseline, and we go from there. Temperature, I'll leave it on 4,000, which is, we know it's low-ish, but we'll leave it on that. So again, back to my corridor, and just quickly rendering so you can get an idea how they work. And then a great way of just filling in your space with lights when you can't get light sources to do it. So not light sources, but lighting fixtures to do what you want. It's really a cheat. You're adding these floating lights to add extra light to different spaces. So you can see now we're getting some light down there that wasn't there before. But extremely useful to be able to do that. Now, this one's still misbehaving, but I'm not going to worry about it now. So then the final thing is daylighting. So I've been doing all of this with artificial only, which is by far the best way to test out your artificial lights. Because what I'm going to do now is switch over to well, in fact, I'm going to make a new, I'm not going to make a new camera view because I've got my exposure settings right. So instead I'm going to duplicate this camera view. And the reason I've done that way is because, again, the exposure settings that are set up in the render settings are stored with this view. I don't want to have to do that again. So now I'm going to look and bring it around so that I can see an area where I know we'll get some sunlight. And then I'll walk backwards, right, so that I can see, again, the area where I'm going to get my sunlight, but now also I can see those light sources. So I can show you how sunlight works with light fixtures, and I'm just going to bring my curtain wall up there so it fills in that gap. That'll do. So I should get light coming through my window, sunlight. So all we need to do is firstly check the sun, which way it's going. So I'm going to turn shadows on, and I can't see any sunlight coming through the window, right? Because everything's in shadow. So I'm going to then go to my sun settings, clicking on the little sun, and then sun settings, and then change this option to still, and then just click apply, so that I can then see how this view looks with that still setting. And I still can't see any sunlight coming through the window. So now I'm going to change to one of these presets. And, well, normally I'd ask you a question and see if any of you know which one's going to give us the most chance of getting some light, but since we're pushed for time, I'm just going to tell you, winter solstice is the one that will give you generally the most sunlight into your spaces. Might be counterintuitive, but you get more sunlight into interiors with winter sun than with summer sun. Okay, so now you can see with the winter solstice, I can now see some sunlight coming through that window, right? Because I can see the rest is in shadow. So then I want to change that angle to get more sunlight to come in. So I'm going to duplicate my sun setting. I don't want to change this one because that's set to midday for the solstice, and that's correct. So I don't want to change that. I'm going to duplicate, and we'll call it winter render sun. So I've got a special sun set up just for rendering. And then I'm going to increase the time, so it's later in the day, and that brings the sun around to what it would be in the afternoon. And bingo, we've got some sunlight now coming clearly through the window onto the floor through all of those window panes. So the first thing to start working with the sun is to make sure you've got control over the sun. Then I'll go to render with, let's start just with, I'll go straight to sun and artificial. Okay, and you can see it's got winter render sun set there as well. Hit render. And we're going to get a very different result to what I had with the artificial lights. So you can see the glowing things still are bright, but the light coming out of those light sources is barely noticeable. We can see it over here a little bit, but this light source, it's doing a lot. If I didn't have the sun on, we'd be seeing that light source emitting light really clearly down onto the floor there. But essentially, because the sun is so much brighter than any man-made light source, it's overpowering all of our artificial light sources. If you're not sure, the sun is far brighter even than lights in things like lighthouses and stadiums, where they have really, seriously bright light, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 lumens even. The sun blows all of them out of the water. And the only reason that we can cope with that is that our eyes adjust to compensate for that. And they do it so quickly you don't even notice. When you're in a room and you look out through a window where the sunlight's coming in, your eyes are very quickly adjusting. But when we're using a program to do it, of course, we've got to adjust manually, and it's very difficult. So that's why I usually recommend you one or the other. To have them combined is very, very difficult, takes a lot of experience. So if I have interior sun only, I can render and it'll look very similar to what I had with the light sources. You can see virtually no difference. If I render with interior artificial only, of course that just turns the sun off, but we're going to get a very different result. So we can now see what the light sources are doing, and this is why they were not very noticeable, because this is with the same exposure I had a minute ago, or similar exposure. So effectively, we're used to seeing it brighter than this because our eyes, again, let in more light by our pupils dilating, or in a camera, the aperture increases. So if I make the exposure value brighter, that's like our pupils, again, dilating to let in more light. Right, but again, if we have the sun with that sort of exposure, the whole thing would just look like bright white. Right, so it takes a lot of experience, but I'll maybe just go back to sun artificial and show you one little final thing. Play for the day. Okay, so you can see that, again, now that I'm rendering with the sunlight, that this area on the floor is far too bright, and we should be using exposure to compensate for that. Don't look at those stairs. They're, of course, the old stairs. They're not with all the things I showed you this morning. Okay, so again, to get this to look the way it should, again, I'll go to adjust exposure and make the exposure value higher, so if you're wondering why it's higher for darker, essentially exposure value is controlling the light. So as you increase that value, you're controlling the light more. So I want to be a little bit bright, but not white. That's overexposed if it's white. So I want some of the colour from the floor to come in, and not be just white, but also from the background. So you can see the floor's okay, the background's no good. So it probably needs to be even darker. I'm going to show you some options for doing the background differently, so you don't always have to do this, but for now, if you want to use the background that comes with Revit, that's what you have to do. So then the final thing I was going to say is you can still get scenes to work with sunlight and artificial, but the main workaround people use is to make the artificial lights far, far brighter than they would be normally. And I mean about 10 times brighter than they would be normally. Which I know might be surprising, but that's just the way it is with the engine that you have with Revit. If you want to go further with it, one other thing to try is to just do a basic setup with the teapot render and then try rendering cloud. So I might just send it off to that. I'm not going to make you wait and watch it render in the cloud, because that'll take a little while. I'm just going to send this off just so that you can see that all of that work I've done setting up the exposure and the lighting settings in the teapot render do come through into the cloud render. So it's really important that you test it like that, get the basic lighting setup that you want. It's got its own controls for exposure, which we'll look at next week maybe, but then here also you just check the render quality. So I'll put that on final. I just usually do that automatically, and then whatever size. I'm on my commercial license. But look, I'll just use it. All right. And you'll see the cloud renders with a different piece of software to the teapot render, and it will actually balance the lighting a lot more. So we'll probably get a much better result with artificial and sunlight using the cloud, but again, it's still really important to set it up with the teapot, and because you get a lot more instant feedback, and then again start then testing it out on the cloud. Okay, so most of you use the cloud render. Yep, good, yeah, that's great. So yeah, just want to make sure everyone knows about that. It's going to give you much better results than the local render, but you still again need to think about using the local render to set things up. A lot of those issues sorted out when you're onto the cloud, but again, it's hard to work it out with testing as you go if you're just starting with the cloud render. So hopefully that was helpful and might have cleared up a few issues that you might have had with lights, and you can maybe take things a bit further with the lighting as well. But otherwise, that's everything for today. So let me know if you've got any questions, but otherwise I might finish that up. Great. Yep. Excellent. Thanks. No, thanks for coming. And yeah, you're welcome. So I'll post those videos as soon as I can. May take all day to get them compressed, but again, they'll be there before long. Maybe have a look tomorrow on YouTube, and I'll put a link from Moodle onto YouTube as well, and hopefully you can find it all. Stop the video there.